I never expected that installing solar panels would lead to a full-blown feud with a notorious HOA complainer and her endless meddling. Will I finally stand up to Karen and reclaim my right to shine? Welcome to our channel. Please subscribe if you want more Karen and HOA stories. From the moment I decided to put up my new solar panels, I knew my life was about to change in ways I never expected. It all started on a bright, warm morning when I stood in my backyard, heart full of hope and excitement. I had spent many nights reading about solar energy, looking at simple maps of my property, and learning what the rules were. I believed that my new panels would bring light and warmth not only to my home but also help our little neighborhood shine in a better way. I had always been a calm person who liked to do things the right way. I made sure I understood every rule and every law before I started. I even visited the library and talked to friendly experts who explained things in a way I could understand. With all that research in my pocket, I felt ready to bring a piece of the future to my roof. But just as I took my first step toward a brighter tomorrow, something unexpected happened that would soon change everything. During the first few minutes of my work, I noticed a car slowly pulling up in front of my house. Out stepped Karen, the neighbor everyone whispered about. Karen was known around here for being very strict and always complaining about anything that did not seem perfect to her. I watched as she walked toward my house with a frown on her face, and my heart began to beat a little faster. I wondered what she could possibly have to say about my solar panels. At first, Karen just stood there, watching me with eyes full of anger. I tried to smile and wave, hoping that maybe she would understand that I meant no harm and that I was only trying to improve my home. But instead of a kind smile, I got a cold glare. Within seconds, I knew that things were about to get more complicated than I had imagined. I felt a twist in my stomach as I wondered, what does she want now? Before I could say anything, Karen opened her mouth and said, "You can't do this," in a loud, clear voice that made me stop in my tracks. I tried to explain that I had looked up every rule and even had a paper from the library to show that my panels were okay. But she wasn't interested in listening. She started to say that my panels were blocking her view and that they were not allowed by the rules of our neighborhood. I felt my calm resolve being challenged by her harsh tone. I was confused. I knew the rules well because I had taken the time to learn about them. I even had a map of my property that showed exactly where my roof ended and the neighbor's area began. I pointed to the map and tried to show her that I was following the law. But Karen shook her head and said, "I know the rules, and you are breaking them." Her voice grew louder, and I could feel a crowd of curious onlookers gathering around. My first day of installing solar panels had suddenly turned into a public debate. In that moment, I felt a mix of sadness and determination. I had worked so hard to get everything ready, and now my dream was being questioned by someone who seemed to care more about rules than about progress. I wondered if I would ever be able to show everyone that my project was not just good for me, but for the whole community. The tension in the air was thick, and I could see that this was only the beginning of a long and challenging road. I took a deep breath and calmly said, "I followed all the rules. I even checked with the experts, and I have all the papers to show that everything is in order." But Karen was not convinced. She crossed her arms and said, "I am calling someone to fix this." I tried to explain again, using simple words, that I meant no harm and that my solar panels would help make our home better. But her angry eyes did not soften. Then, in an instant that felt like it lasted forever, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. I looked around and saw a police car slowly coming up the street. My heart raced because I never imagined that something so small could lead to police involvement. The officers got out and walked toward me, their faces serious. I stood there, holding my papers tightly, wondering how I could have ended up in a situation where the law was being used against my honest efforts. As the police officers approached, I repeated again, in the simplest and clearest way I could, that I had done nothing wrong. I explained that I had all my research, my property maps, and my legal papers to prove that my installation was allowed. But Karen continued to shout that I was breaking the rules and that I had to stop immediately. I felt a knot of fear in my stomach, yet I also felt a deep determination not to give up on what I believed was right. Even as the officers listened, I could see that Karen was not ready to listen to any reason. Her face was red, and she seemed almost to tremble with anger. In that tense moment, I knew that this simple act of installing solar panels had turned into a fight for fairness and truth. I realized that I might have to use everything I had learned from my research, all the maps and papers, and even the support of others in our neighborhood to stand up for what was right. As the first police officer took a closer look at my papers, I could tell that he was surprised at how much effort I had put into following the rules. But before he could say much, Karen interrupted with more angry words. I felt torn between the need to explain myself and the rising fear of making the situation even worse. The tension was thick, and every word seemed to push us further apart. Then, just when I thought the situation could not become any more confusing, a neighbor stepped forward and whispered that they had heard about my research and that they believed I was right. This small voice of support gave me a spark of hope. It made me realize that even though Karen was very loud and angry, I was not alone. I knew that the journey ahead would be filled with many more challenges, and I had to be strong and smart to overcome them. I could see the worried faces of a few other neighbors who had come to watch. They looked at me as if they were waiting for something to happen next. I tried to make eye contact with one of them, and for a moment I felt a connection. A shared hope that maybe together we could see the truth of my plans. My heart swelled with both fear and courage as I prepared myself for what was coming next.
I never imagined that installing solar panels could lead to such a dramatic scene. All I wanted was to help our community be more energy efficient and kind to our planet. But now, here I was, caught in a storm of anger and suspicion, with Karen at the center of it all. I wondered how I would ever be able to prove that I was doing the right thing when everything was turning so dark and confusing. As the police officers took a few more minutes to check everything, I quietly promised myself that I would not let this setback stop me. I knew I had to learn even more about the rules and find more proof to show that my solar panels were perfectly legal. I made a mental note to go back to the library, review the property maps again, and maybe even contact a lawyer if I had to. I needed to be prepared for whatever came next. With every passing minute, the situation grew more intense. I could feel the eyes of everyone watching, and each second made me more determined to stand up for what I believed in. Even though Karen's voice was loud and full of anger, I had a quiet inner voice that told me to stay calm and to keep fighting for what was right. I knew that this was only the beginning of a long and complicated story, a story that would test my patience, my courage, and my love for progress. I left that first encounter with a mix of emotions. I was scared by the sudden involvement of the police, yet I was also ready to dig deeper and gather every bit of evidence I needed. I was now more determined than ever to prove that my solar panels were a step toward a better future, not a mistake or a break of the rules. I could feel that the path ahead was filled with challenges, and I silently vowed that I would not back down. In the end, as I watched the police finish their initial check and Karen storm off with her arms crossed and a scowl on her face, I realized that my journey was just beginning. I knew I would need every bit of knowledge and every piece of evidence to defend my project. I promised myself that I would find the truth hidden in the maps, the papers, and even in the eyes of those who believed in a brighter future. Now, standing on my porch with the half-installed solar panels above me, I felt a mix of fear, determination, and hope. I knew that the battle was only starting and that I had many more steps to take. I also knew that I had to be ready for the next twist, the next surprising challenge that would come my way. The promise of a brighter future was still shining, even if it was hidden behind a cloud of angry words and harsh faces. I woke up one bright morning, but my heart was heavy. I knew that today would be different. I had new facts in hand and a plan to stand up for what was right. I started my day by gathering my research. I looked at old records, property maps, and even talked to a few experts about our community rules. Each piece of information gave me a bit more hope and a little more strength. I remember the first 10 seconds of that day as if it were a hook, pulling me into a mix of worry and determination. I felt calm, even though I knew that Karen, with her loud voice and strong opinions, would soon be back with her complaints. She had already stirred up trouble, and now I was ready to answer with truth and care. I took my laptop and started reading every document I could find on the HOA rules. I found parts that said I had every right to install my solar panels. I printed the pages and marked them with a bright blue pen. I studied a property map that showed the boundaries of our roofs and gardens. This map was important because it clearly showed that my solar panels did not cross any lines that belonged to Karen or anyone else. I felt like a detective, putting the puzzle pieces together. Later that day, I sat down with a trusted friend named Mark. Mark was smart and knew a lot about legal matters. He explained how I could use these documents to protect my project. I listened carefully as he talked about the law and the rules. I learned that I had a strong case, and that made me feel brave. Even though Karen was known for her strong opinions, I believed that the truth would shine through. At the community center that afternoon, I attended an HOA meeting. The room buzzed with whispers and uneasy glances. I took my seat quietly, my folder full of papers close by. Karen was already there, sitting at the front with an angry look on her face. Her eyes seemed to scan the room, daring anyone to challenge her. I could feel my heart beat faster, but I stayed calm and collected. The meeting began slowly, with a few members discussing upcoming community events. Then the topic turned to my solar panels. Karen stood up abruptly and began to speak. Her voice was loud and filled with anger. She claimed that my solar panels were a threat to the neighborhood's look and that they might even lower the property values. I listened carefully, nodding my head as I waited for my turn to speak. I knew that if I let her anger get to me, I might lose my calm voice of reason. When it was my turn, I stood up slowly. I took a deep breath and explained that I had done all the research. I held up my printed documents and the property map. I showed everyone the exact spot where my panels would go. I explained how the law supported my right to use renewable energy, and I talked about the benefits it could bring to our community. I kept my voice steady and kind, even though I felt nervous inside. I wanted everyone to know that I was not just a person with a project, but someone who cared deeply about fairness and the truth. The room fell silent for a moment. I could see some faces showing surprise, and even a few nods of agreement. But Karen was not ready to give up. She interrupted me, saying that I was being naive. She argued that the rules were there for a reason and that I was disturbing the peace. Her words were sharp, and they cut through the quiet room. I took another deep breath and calmly replied that I respected the rules, and that was why I had come prepared with all the facts. After a long discussion, the board decided to take a break. I stepped outside, where Mark met me with a worried look. He whispered that he had heard another complaint from Karen, this time to the local media. Apparently, Karen had recorded parts of our discussion and was planning to post them online, hoping to sway public opinion. My heart sank a little. I did not want to fight a media battle, but I knew that I had to be ready. That evening, I sat at home and reviewed my next steps. I spent hours watching videos about community activism and legal rights. I made sure I understood every word in the documents. I even learned some new things about how to use property maps to support my claim. I felt more determined than ever. I wrote down my plan. I would use the facts I had gathered to stand strong, and I would not let Karen's loud voice drown out the truth. The next day, I decided to reach out to a local journalist. I wanted to share my story and the evidence I had collected. I wrote a simple email explaining my situation and attached scanned copies of my documents and property maps. I explained that I was fighting for a clean, fair neighborhood and that the rules were clear. I sent the email with a sense of hope and a touch of worry, not knowing if the story would be picked up by the media. A few hours later, I received a reply. The journalist was intrigued and asked if I could meet and talk more. We arranged to meet at a nearby park, where the conversation was relaxed but serious. The journalist listened to my story with careful attention. I explained again about the HOA rules, the property map, and my right to install solar panels. The journalist nodded thoughtfully, promising to look deeper into the matter and to write a balanced story. I left that meeting feeling a mix of relief and anxiety, knowing that the next steps could change everything. That night, a few residents came by to share their own stories about similar issues in our community. They talked about small annoyances and unfair rules that had hurt many of us. One neighbor said, "I always thought we were a friendly community, but now I see that some people use the rules to bully others." Their words made me feel less alone, and they filled me with a quiet strength. I realized that this was not just about my panels, but about fairness and respect for everyone in our neighborhood. As the days passed, I kept busy. I attended more HOA meetings, and I met with other residents who were curious about my project. Every time I explained my research and showed the property map, I saw eyes widen with understanding. I felt like a teacher sharing a secret that could help us all. I also kept a close eye on Karen, who seemed to become more agitated each time she saw me. Her face would twist into a frown, and her arms would cross tightly. I wondered what she was afraid of, but I never let that stop me from doing what was right. One afternoon, as I was going over my notes, I got a call from the local newspaper. The journalist had written a story, and they wanted to interview me again. I was both excited and nervous. I agreed, and we set a time for the next interview. I spent that night rehearsing my words, making sure I could speak simply and clearly. I knew that my calm and clear voice was my best tool in a situation that could easily turn into a shouting match. The next interview went well. I explained everything from the beginning, sharing my research, the property map, and even a little bit about my conversation with Mark. I spoke about how using renewable energy was good for the community and for the world. The journalist seemed to appreciate my honest words, and I could tell that my story was reaching more people. After the interview, I received encouraging messages from neighbors who said they felt proud that someone was standing up for truth. Throughout all of this, Karen continued her campaign of anger. She organized her own meetings and tried to rally a group of residents against me. I tried to listen to their concerns and respond with facts, but it was hard when emotions ran so high. I always made sure to speak in a calm, clear tone, even when Karen's words were loud and hurtful. I knew that if I lost my calm, I would lose the trust of those who were beginning to listen to me. Now, as I sit here writing down these events, I am filled with both worry and hope. Every step I take is a balance between standing up to an overbearing force and keeping the peace in our community. I know that my research, my property maps, and my careful words have made a difference. I have learned that truth is a quiet but powerful thing, and that even when someone like Karen tries to drown it out, the truth finds a way to shine through. I still have many more days of meetings and conversations ahead, and I know that the battle is not over. But I am ready to face whatever comes next. I have the facts, I have the law on my side, and I have the support of many kind neighbors. As I prepare for the next chapter, I remind myself that being calm, reasonable, and determined is the best way to protect what is right. Every new piece of evidence and every kind word from a neighbor gives me strength. I believe that soon, our community will see that fairness and truth are the most powerful tools we have. I take a deep breath and smile, knowing that my journey is far from over. Even when things get tough, I know that staying true to my beliefs is the best way to face an entitled and overbearing opponent. I am ready for the next challenge, and I am sure that with a clear mind and the help of my friends, I will keep moving forward. I stepped into the meeting room with a heart full of hope and a mind full of facts. I had spent many long nights poring over property maps and legal documents that proved my solar panels were safe and right. I remembered the first 10 seconds of the meeting when I looked up and saw Karen, arms folded, ready to argue. It was then I knew that every piece of research mattered. I stood calm and spoke clearly, explaining my case with care. I showed the maps that marked my property lines, proving that I was within my rights. I even had printed copies of legal rules that said I could use renewable energy. My voice was steady, even though I felt a mix of anger and relief. Karen tried to interrupt, her tone loud and harsh, but I calmly continued. I told the board how I had done my homework and followed every rule to the letter. I mentioned that I had talked to experts and used real information to back up my story. I could see a few heads nodding, and that gave me courage. Every word was a step toward justice, and every fact I shared was a shield against unfair claims. Midway through, a reporter from the local news raised a hand. They wanted to know more about the situation. I explained how important it was for everyone in our community to know that fairness should win over entitlement. I mentioned that media exposure could help clear the air. This idea sparked new energy in the room. It was a turning point that made me feel even more determined. As the meeting ended, the board promised to review all the facts I presented. I left the room with a mix of worry and hope. I knew Karen would not give up easily, but I also knew that truth and preparation were my best friends. The decision was not made yet, and that kept my heart racing. I looked back at the meeting room, feeling like I had just begun the long journey toward fairness. My battle for my solar panels was far from over, and I wondered what surprise the next step would bring. The fight for my right to shine was on, and I was ready for every twist it might bring. I left with hope and determination, ready for the next challenge.